Grand opening, grand closing. This whole week or two, I'll say the week, it's been pretty much two things on my timeline on Twitter. It was either Final Fantasy 16 or FTC notes. Primarily PlayStation fans were tweeting out Final Fantasy 16 content. I tried to avoid it in fear of spoilers, but the few stuff that I did see was great gameplay, great videos, PS5 shares and stuff like that. And then the other end was largely, primarily from the Xbox community, in-depth conversations on the FTC, which blows my mind, because I don't think, and I ain't gonna say I think, I know most of us, and I'll include myself, don't understand legal speak. I'm sorry, but 5 minutes on Google search engine does not qualify as you having the capability to understand the merits of a legal proceeding. That's why I didn't really get involved too deep into this. I definitely did not spend any time watching whatever, I guess a Zoom meeting, I don't know, however they broadcasted this hearing. Pay no mind, because to me it doesn't really change the end result. The language, the metrics, how the law works, it all resides within the professionals, within Microsoft, ATC, and the judge. So that really is whatever. But what I would like to talk about is the difference between, well, really the conversation everyone's having, and it's blurred the lines. And what I mean by the lines being blurred is the argument about consolidation or is the argument about exclusives? It's two different topics, right? It's two totally different topics, right? If the concern about Microsoft buying ABK, Activision Blizzard King, is about consolidation, then really that's worrying about the industry regardless who's doing it. Obviously, the focus will be on Microsoft because they're the ones actively buying Activision Blizzard King. But if Sony tried to get a major publisher, that same logic of worrying about or the concern over consolidation would apply to Sony as well. So for example, if Sony wanted to buy Rockstar or EA or Ubisoft, then the same group that's against Microsoft getting ABK should also be against Sony acquiring Ubisoft, EA, or Rockstar or something like that, right? But on the same token, they should also be against Tencent or Ember on what's the other major publisher? Starts with an E. I'm sorry, I forgot what they're called. Embracer Group, right? Embracer Group trying to acquire EA. They should be against that. Tencent trying to acquire Ubisoft. They should be against that, right? Because if the argument's about consolidation, it's the argument of any one power, regardless if it's first party or third party, absorbing some of the major players, and it's all being funneled into one area. Now, if you had to choose the lesser of the two evils, then Embracer Group and Tencent will be the lesser of the two evils versus Sony and Microsoft and Nintendo, simply because Tencent and Embracer Group don't have a platform. So even if they absorb EA, or if they absorb Ubisoft, or if they absorb whoever, the games will still be on every platform. They would just make the money and profit off of it, right? While in the hands of a first party, you can foresee that another platform would not have those games. For example, if Nintendo were to acquire, let's say, Square Enix, well, you could forget about any Square Enix game being on Xbox, PC, or Sony. So I would say the one company we should be fortunate that's not really into this game of acquiring stuff is Nintendo, because you best believe if Nintendo acquires somebody, they have no issues with making exclusive. And to be honest, I don't even think anybody would complain. For some reason, Nintendo gets to do what they want. But that's a conversation of consolidation. If the conversation is about exclusives, that's a whole different conversation. That's not the same as consolidation. And in this case, I personally don't see anything wrong with a company buying either a developer or a publisher to acquire exclusives. I honestly, I never see a problem with that. In fact, I think that's literally the point. Why else would you get a publisher or developers, right? Now, people could be upset that, by acquiring a major publisher, you're taking games away from a platform. Well, yeah, that's pretty much it. Whether you do it a la carte, like the way Sony does, getting exclusives on a game-by-game basis from developers, or you do it Microsoft's method where you just buy the publisher and now all their games belongs to that platform. It is what it is. Now, this is not something this is something that, as you can see here, even Jim Ryan, as you can see, doesn't have an issue. He doesn't see it as anti-competitive, right? Exclusives kind of like an art, right? You can't just buy any exclusives, right? It's not just randomly, we'll get this game, we'll get that game, right? There has to be a certain art and style to it. Nintendo understands that. Sony understands that. I don't think Microsoft understands that, right? Because even though you're getting exclusives, you have to get the right exclusives that cater to the core audience, right? There's this thing that on Twitter and within the community, right? There's this fundamental flawed logic of, well, you got to cater to everybody. You don't understand. Everybody don't spend a lot of money on their console. Like you could have, you have a lot of gamers on PlayStation, right? You have the core gamers. Those are the ones that will buy the most amount of games. And then as you move away from the core gamers and start stepping into the casual gamers, they hardly buy games. They're casuals. They buy what they like. They don't venture off into a lot of IPs and stuff like that, whatever. But they generally gravitate to what they got. So you could say more often than not, they'll gravitate to the super big games. They'll gravitate to, the Red Dead Redemptions, the Grand Theft Autos, the Call of Duties, the Maddens, the 2Ks, and stuff like that. Maybe once in a while, if a new big IP comes out, like Hogwarts, all right, they'll jump on that. Elden Ring, once in a blue. But for the most part, they generally go after familiarity, what they're comfortable with, right? So when a company like Sony or Nintendo is going after a third-party exclusive, they're primarily, I would imagine, looking at how would the core respond. Because if it's very popular with the core, it can influence the casuals to buy it, right? And that's how it usually is. The casuals generally don't lead the core. The core generally leads the casuals, right? If enough of the core audience makes this game the big deal and be like, man, this game is the bomb. We gotta play this, gotta play it. The casuals are gonna be like, hey, what's going on over there? What are you core gamers talking about? You talking about what? You talking about what game? Yeah, everybody's playing it. Well, hey, if you playing, I'm playing it, right? So you have to cater those games, right? If you look at Xbox tried, third-party exclusives or at least timed exclusives, right? But the games they pick don't really attract their core audience, which in turn don't really attract the casuals on their box. Take, for example, Pentiment, Crossfire, what is it? Until Dusk Falls, something like that. I can't remember the name. What else? That horror first-person game. I forgot what it's called, right? I'm having trouble remembering the names. That's how little interest I had in the games, right? And you hardly seen the core gamers on Xbox even talk about them. Even despite those games where they won on Game Pass, they hardly talked about it. It wasn't something they were interested in, right? It only attracted a niche group. And in my opinion, the niche group that those games attracted to are just Twitter guys. They really didn't like it. They just did it because they're trying to big up Microsoft. They're trying to prop them up. They're doing their part to sell a product for whatever weird reason, as if they're part of the marketing team because they're one big happy family. It's just weird. The reality is they weren't really playing those games. And because the core audience of Xbox didn't really play those games, then how are you going to attract the casuals when even the core audience, right? So picking third-party exclusives is also an art to it. You want to pick the right games, that attracts the audience and get the platform going, right? So as you can see, as I showed, Jim Ryan didn't feel exclusives anti-competitive, and it's not. It's never been. I mean, only in gaming would we argue exclusives anti-competitive. No other industry does that. No other industry would even dare say exclusives is anti-competitive. It just doesn't make sense, right? Now, there's a narrative that's really miseducating on what's going on, right? Apparently, there's a narrative saying that Sony created this environment. They created this environment of anti-competitiveness. I will say this. If you started gaming on the 360 or on the PlayStation 2, if you started gaming on the PlayStation 1, that gen, whether it's N64, PlayStation 1, if you started gaming that gen, don't have a conversation on this topic, all right? Unless you actually did your research, you actually, went back in time, maybe got yourself, history on the console wars, you looked up videos, look at documentaries. If you didn't do any of that, don't talk about it, because the community is pushing some nonsensical information, misinforming stuff, and I don't know why, because you could easily research this stuff. You could look up at documentaries, right? And what's being passed is this false perception of Sony created this anti-competitive environment by buying up exclusives, so now everybody has to fight back. Let me go back in time real quick, right? Let me show you this image, right? This image right here, right? You see the Great Console War, right? You can see that, right? This is possibly one of the most famous console wars of all time. This was literally, George Foreman and Ali. This was Mike Tyson and Holyfield. This is when you think of console war, this right here is the standard. I don't think we will ever see a level of console war than this right here. This right here is the heart of it, right? Genesis pushing out literally in commercials. Genesis does what Nintendo don't. It was insane. But the reality is, though, the console war didn't start here, though. There was a war that started, but in reality, it wasn't really a war. It was an absolute annihilation, right? What I'm talking about is something that most people, we're going to go back in time. Some of you don't even know, maybe be familiar with the consoles. You'll definitely be familiar with one console, but you may not be familiar with the other console. There was a console war going on, but it was more like a genocide, to be honest. It was a complete annihilation. And what I'm talking about is this right here. This one. Nintendo Entertainment System versus the Master System. This right here that you see on the screen was a complete annihilation, right? It was a slaughter. So what happened? What was the significance of Nintendo Entertainment System, Master System? So we had the crash of 86 or 85 or 83. I think it was 83. The video game crash, right? Lack of quality control. Companies were making games without the permission of the platform holder, and some games were releasing broken, unfinished. It was really bad, right? Gamers were buying games that were literally not even completed. They just weren't done. They were just released half made, and you could never beat it. You don't even know who was buying what. It was a bad time for consoles. Nintendo comes in, and Nintendo hunkered down. They decided to make a console, but they did more than just say a hunk of console. They created rules that no one's allowed to make a game unless you got approval from them. And that's where the Nintendo seal of quality came into play, right? And Nintendo, to this day, held quality to the highest standards, right? And that was the first time where gamers started seeing quality products, right? So everybody was gravitating to the Nintendo Entertainment System because every game was of quality. They were great games. Mario, Zelda. It was incredible. It was an incredible platform. The sales were going through the roof. And come Sega. Sega's like, hey, we have great games from the arcades. Let's take what we do from the arcades and let's create our own home system. And they too believed in quality, right? And they were already used to it because they were already making games. The problem is Nintendo was already ahead in saturation with the market. They pretty much control the market, right? And this is where it got dark. In order for a third party to make a game on the market-leading console, the Nintendo Entertainment System, Nintendo binded them to the contract. Meaning, if you want to make a game for Nintendo, you cannot make this game for any other platform. In other words, the game automatically became an exclusive for Nintendo. If the company said, no, we want to put our games on the platform, the Nintendo would simply say, fine, put it on all the platforms you want. It just won't be on ours. Have a nice day. Goodbye. And the company's like, okay, what are my options? Master System, Atari, which is defunct, and maybe PC. There was really not many options for, these third-party developers to put games on a console. And right now, the most popular console everybody has is Nintendo. So if you want to be successful and have great game sales, you got to put on Nintendo. So by default, the game you making was not going to be multiplayer. It's going to be a Nintendo exclusive. And that's how Nintendo dominated that generation. Master System, Sega pretty much had to rely on their own, which was kind of a blessing, and I'll explain that soon. If Sega got any third party, they would have to go after the third party as fast as possible before they got into Nintendo's hands, right? So Nintendo completely dominated. That's just the story. So this console war wasn't really a console war. It was pretty much a genocide. Now, my first console that I bought was actually the Master System. Not bought, but my parents. My cousin had the Nintendo Entertainment, the NES. I eventually got my own. But because he had the NES, I'm thinking, let me get the Master System because we love the Sega arcades. It was amazing. I'm thinking, you know what? We got the Sega inside our house. I'll have the Sega, you have the Nintendo, and we'll both be gaming. And it was. And the relationship was great. Myself and my cousin Gil, we enjoyed everything. It was just amazing, right? Amazing time, having both systems. But you can clearly see that Nintendo had the lion's share, right? So we go from that, right, to now this generation right here. I'm going back here. Yeah, the Sega Genesis and Nintendo, the Super NES. Now, what changed with this one was Nintendo got sued and lost. They no longer was allowed to force developers to make the games exclusive. So that was no longer allowed. So part of the agreement of making a game on Super Nintendo was not that restriction. So that restriction was no longer there. So this opened the door for third party to be on the Sega Genesis. But now here's where it really got interesting. Remember when I said that because of Nintendo's practices, forcing third party to lock down their games only to the NES, this forced Sega to really ramp up their first party because they really couldn't do anything else. They had no choice. If it wasn't them, then who? Nobody else was really making games. This led to an onslaught of library for the Genesis. Sega decided to launch their console before the Super NES, and my God, the amount of exclusives that Genesis just produced, Sega just produced. It felt like they were producing new IPs on a weekly basis, and then they were going after big IPs, Michael Jackson, Moonwalker game. They Joe Montana, John Madden. They were going after licensed games, and one of their strategies was going after sports games. They felt that the future of gaming, well, not future of gaming, but one of the biggest pushes for gaming will soon be licensed games. That's why Sega Genesis had, the actual licenses for games, from third party. So they saw the rise of EA. They say, hey, we got to go after EA. So they were the first ones to get John Madden, or at least John Madden before Nintendo. Buster Douglas boxing, Tommy Lasorda baseball. You saw a lot of licensed games from big players throughout the sports. It was insane, right? And the position Nintendo put Sega literally is what made them get in the gym and grow and just put all that effort out into the Genesis, and it became a straight up console war. And Sega also tried to do things the opposite of Nintendo, right? Nintendo was very conservative, family friendly, and Sega's like, wait a minute, we can't we'll be the opposite. We'll be the daring guys, and it just paid off, right? Amazing time. Probably one of the best generations in terms of competitiveness and games. Oh, both those platforms. I don't think we'll ever see another generation where, from a first-party perspective, it was just an onslaught of new IPs after new IPs and creativity. Oh, this was the golden era. It was absolutely amazing, right? And for those that actually lived it and enjoyed it, you know. But this is where the whole exclusive things between this and this really here, that's where the whole exclusive fight right here. Okay. So why is Sony being blamed? Well, what I found funny is, well, let me go back. Microsoft, the real blame in this is not Sony in the third-party exclusive. Sure, Sony locking down, using their influence, using their market share to lock down exclusive. Is that making the situation tougher for Microsoft? Absolutely. But it's not like other companies haven't been in that tough situation. PlayStation 3 was a tough gen for Sony. They didn't make any money at all. It was a gen of absolute revenue loss, right? So in terms of revenue, right, if we're going to talk money, PlayStation 3 is the loser from a money perspective. Now, I know from gamers, we'll be like, I don't care, that's not my problem. But let's talk about, since this is more about the company, let's all be right. From a money perspective, PlayStation lost the gen. They did not make any profit. They never even made positive revenue on the PS3, right? The metric for PS3 was year over year less revenue loss. But make no mistake, every year it was a revenue loss. It was a bad time for Sony overall. That's why, as a company, they were junk bond status. It was not only just PlayStation that was bad. Sony, the whole company, was just in a bad shape, right? But they doubled down on their first party, reinvested in their stuff, and made better decisions for their PlayStation 4. And everything that they lost, the mind share, the market share, the revenue, they made it back and then some, and created possibly one of the most successful gens of PlayStation history. With PlayStation 5, looks like they're going to even go beyond that and break that, right? So companies go through their issues. Nintendo went through theirs. GameCube, even though it was profitable, only sold 25 million. They went with the Wii. Wii skyrocketed to 100 million, but then they made the Wii U and it was a disaster, right? But now look, they're back at the Switch. So every company goes through their video game company goes through their bad moments, right? Their bad gen, but they bounce back. Microsoft was in the same boat. They were doing phenomenal during the Xbox 360 era, making the right decisions. But when Matrix took over and Peter Moore left, that's when everything went spiraling out of control, because they put all their focus on something that wasn't really Xbox. Project Natal, aka Connect, they tried to make that the heart of Xbox, and it miserably failed, right? But if that wasn't enough, when Phil Spencer took over in 2014, in fact, he took over even before 2014, because he took over, Matrix was gone before the launch of the Xbox One, so Phil Spencer was in charge. The issue is, it was just continuous bad decision making that led to this, right? That's really the issue with Microsoft. The issue with Microsoft isn't Sony with third-party exclusive. It's Microsoft don't have that talent or the intelligence or just the pizzazz, the skills to know what to do, right? And they constantly make bad decisions, right? Of course, people are going to say, well, Microsoft's buying, Activision, Blizzard, Bethesda. They know what they're doing. No, they don't know what they're doing. That's just a result because they just have money. I mean, you don't need to be a genius where if the parent company's like, hey, we're going to give you $80 billion to fix this problem. All right, cool. Who can I buy? Yeah, can I buy Bethesda? Sure. Can I buy Activision? Sure. That doesn't really take that much talent to be like, all right, like, I mean, hell, even I could do that. If I work for Sony and Sony's like, hey, we're going to give you $50 billion, Porter Rock, what idea you have? I'm going to be like, Take-Two? We could buy Take-Two. We could buy Ubisoft, buy Capcom. I mean, is that really that hard? You just look at the environment and you see some of the best publishers out there. It's not hard to say, yeah, let's buy them. The only limiting factor is literally the money. So that's not really skills, right? The true skills is seeing vision and being able to pick the right third party, pick the right IPs, make the right decisions, know what game is not quality, what is quality. And Microsoft, to this day, still don't have that. They don't have that to this day, right? Look at Crackdown 3. Abysmal. We all know that. It doesn't work. State of Decay 2. I mean, even with the acquisition of Bethesda, right? Right off the bat, the one game that did come out good was Hi-Fi Rush, but it's a small niche, indie type game, right? Their big AAA game, their first big AAA game that's exclusive to Xbox was a disaster, Redfall. And the funny part is the developers was hoping that the game would get canceled, and Microsoft's not even smart enough to listen to their own developers. They let the disaster happen. To show you how inept and incompetent Microsoft is, I'm going to read you a little excerpt from here. This is Volume 2, History of Video Games. Microsoft, right, for whatever reason, did not even have the brain cells to see literally the winning ticket to the lotto. Microsoft literally, if the best analogy is, imagine somebody approached you and said, hey brother, here's the winning numbers to tomorrow's lotto, enjoy. Or literally, hey, I just won the lotto, but I don't want it because for whatever reason, here, you can have my ticket. Enjoy this $100 million. And you look at the ticket and you see that it's the winning ticket and you're like, no thanks. I'm going to work my 9-to-5 job. I'm good. That's literally what Microsoft did when they said no to Spider-Man. Like literally, Microsoft had a golden goose egg in the palm of their hand, right? Now, this is talked about in here, and I'm going to read a little bit to you. So, story time, kiddies. So Jae Young was hired as Marvel's Vice President of Games in 2014, right? So, this is a quote from Jae Young. My team and I had this dream that we could do great games in the console space. Back then, our flagship titles on the console side were the Lego titles. They sold well. The fans loved them. They were good games. The games we did with Activision were trending poorly. I think the last Spider-Man game that shipped scored in the 40s on Metacritic. Hired as Marvel's Vice President of Games in May 2014, Jae Young's first challenge was to discover why Marvel's box office success hadn't translated to games. So what Marvel was trying to figure out is, hey, some of our movies IPs are some of the biggest movies in the industry. Why do our games suck hind booty? They are terrible. What is going on? So they went to Jae Young, says, you need to fix this. Figure it out. We want our games on the level of our movies. On the Marvel side, this is a quote again from Jae Young. On the Marvel side, there have been games that were beloved well before I got there. Marvel vs. Capcom had its fan base. Ultimate Alliance had its fan base. They both were really high quality games that were made for fans. Now, what he needed was a publishing partner who hadn't adopted the crappy licensed games mentality. He needed a company with an eye for long-term investment, one with a vested interest that would benefit from building a franchise. That partner would need to have a deep pool of talent, commitment to quality, and exhaustively deep pockets. There were 3 companies that fit that description. One of them, Nintendo, mostly developed games based on its own intellectual properties. This is a quote from Jae Young. Being from console first party in my past, I pinged both sides, both Xbox and PlayStation, and said, we don't have any big console deals with anyone right now. What would you like to do? Microsoft's strategy was to focus on their own IP. They passed. Now keep in mind, this is 2014. So now we have hindsight. So from 2014 to 2019, right? Well, no, 2020. We'll go 2020. From 2014 to 2020, 6 years. What first party IP, their own IP, they focused on? Especially, name me first party IPs that they focused on that it made sense to pass on Spider-Man. I can't figure it out. I know in 2014 they bought Minecraft, Mohang, but that's not first party IP. They was just acquiring them. But within their scope, what banger justified not taking on Spider-Man? Like, we're talking about $1 trillion company. You could still focus on your first RDP. Like, acquiring Spider-Man would have not interfered. What if somebody said, you know what? We're going to let our first party studios do our first party studios. We're just going to get somebody to make this. What if it was Microsoft that said, you know what? We'll take Spider-Man, and you know what? Insomniac right now is making, because they released Sunset Overdrive, I think, in 2014. But like, hey, Insomniac just released Sunset Overdrive. Let's hire them to do Spider-Man. Microsoft could have easily made that decision because Insomniac was not acquired by Sony, nor the talks or conversation to acquire wasn't happening at that point. So Microsoft could have said, hey, Insomniac, we own the Spider-Man IP. We want you to make it. They literally could have done that. The same thing Sony did. And right now, this Spider-Man game would have been on Xbox. Just by simply having a vision. But no. Now tell me, is that Sony's fault? Right? I sat down with these two execs from PlayStation third party, Adam Boyles and John Drake, in August 2014. So Microsoft said no before August 2014. In a conference room in Burbank, I said, we have a dream that this is possible, that we could beat Arkham and have one game at least and maybe multiple games that could drive adoption of your platform. Jay Young. Boys Drake, Connie Booth, Vice President of Product and Development, Sony Interactive Entertainment, and Scott Brody, Senior Vice President of Product Development, Sony Interactive Entertainment, offered to make a AAA PlayStation exclusive Spider-Man. With the exception of 2003, Activision had released at least one Spider-Man game per year from 2000 through 2008, sometimes more. Having controlled the license for nearly a decade, Activision was so immersed in how well Spider-Man games were currently selling that they could no longer imagine how well a Spider-Man game could sell. From Vince Desi, quote, you got Spider-Man, you got Sony, you got people willing to throw 40 or 50 million into a game, conservatively. That's very different. In those days before Arkham Asylum, the publisher was paying you, not the licensor, and the publisher wanted to spend as little as possible. Marvel decided to approach Activision about terminating the contract early. As they negotiated the request, Ong explained that Spider-Man needed new talent, a bigger budget, and fresh eyes. Quote from Jay Ong. We finally negotiated a deal for them to walk away. It was a mutually beneficial deal. When we shook hands on it, they asked, they being Activision, so what are you going to do with this IP after you get it back? I said, Jaeong, I'm going to find a better home for it. They replied, good luck finding your unicorn. Sony turned the project over to Insomniac Games, an independent studio at the time, but one of Sony's most important partners. Insomniac had a long list of hits that were published under the Sony label, Spyro the Dragon, Ratchet & Clank vs. Fallen Man, and most recently, well, not Sunset Overdrive, because Sunset Overdrive was Xbox. I'm not going to read the rest, but the point I'm trying to make is, if Microsoft did not have the vision to clearly see that this could have been their IP, and all they needed to do was throw money at it, which they clearly had, then how can we actually look at them as being intelligent or anything? Can we really say it was Sony's exclusive deal that hurt Microsoft? Sure, the competition for exclusives is always there. Sony had to deal with it during the 360 PS3 era. PS3 was getting killed, and Microsoft was making exclusive deals left and right, right? They had timed exclusive deals for Mass Effect, which they published themselves. Oblivion was timed exclusives. BioShock was timed exclusives, right? They got Ninja Gaiden exclusive, right? It wasn't until Hidekagi left that the game finally came to PlayStation, right? Then they stole exclusives. Not stole, but they were able to compete with PlayStation to prevent them from getting exclusives. So Final Fantasy was no longer an exclusive. Grand Theft Auto was no longer exclusive. But the two DLC of first for the franchise, downloadable content that continue the stories, was timed exclusive for Xbox. And here's the thing. Back in those days, games that were timed exclusives, part of the deal was you cannot announce that it's timed exclusives. So when you had those deals, people weren't sure it was coming to PlayStation or whatever, because it's not like now, where now they kind of let you know up front, hey, this is, timed exclusive, so it's coming within a year. It wasn't like that during that time. So when Microsoft announced that they had 2 downloadable content and they paid $50 million, everybody thought if you buy GTA on PlayStation, you're going to get a half-ass product because the downloadable content is not going to be on PlayStation. It's Xbox exclusives. Or when they announced BioShock, we're like, wow, you got to get Xbox to play BioShock. Mass Effect, man. That's how it was. When the game was about to launch on the PlayStation, you found out like a month before, 2 months before, after like a year or two. So those days, when games were timed exclusives, you more often than not actually thought they were just exclusive because you would get no rumors or anything. It's not like now when you could pretty much, if you wanted to wait, to wait. Back then you didn't have that, right? But even under those conditions, Sony threw down, right? Now, granted, their revenue they didn't make up as a company, but they restored faith with the gamers because towards the latter half of the PS3, you saw the quality games they're releasing, and some of them were some of the biggest games, period. The Last of Us, as a final swan song for the PlayStation 3, oh man, that was huge. God of War 3 was huge. Sony, again, getting third-party exclusives that cater to the audience. Getting Demon Souls, that was a big risk, especially as a first-party title. That was a big risk, and it paid off. So it was those things that really, help lead to the success to the next platform, despite Microsoft gobbling up timed exclusives, and eating away at the few exclusives PlayStation was known for, right? And preventing new exclusives from appearing. Assassin's Creed was supposed to be a PS3 exclusive. But because due to the poor sales and stuff, Ubisoft was like, whoa, this is not happening. Microsoft came in and be like, hey, how console selling? Bring it on, right? Ultimately, companies can battle the fight against exclusives. Microsoft with Xbox is not in the position it's in because of Sony. It's not. As you can see, from 2014 to 2019, I can't even really tell you what Microsoft was really doing. They barely made any moves. They barely got the right games on their platform. And they launched, and it blows my mind, they launched into a new console gen, 2020, and they really thought simply by having Game Pass, which at the time was mostly full of Xbox One games, but you can play them with enhancements, was really going to sell consoles. They did not launch the console with amazing games. Even if it was cross-gen. It was absolutely insane. Xbox is in the position that they're in simply because their leadership is inept to truly bring quality titles. So they have to go with the one thing they do know, which is buy stuff. Now, I'm not going to pretend and say that's wrong. That's not wrong. There's nothing illegal, immoral, unethical about buying another company to boost your own product. So I personally don't see anything wrong with the acquisition of Bethesda, ABK, whatever. I know some people are going to argue about the whole consolidation. I'm not going to get into that because, to be honest, I don't think we're going to see much of a difference, right? I think the only big difference we'll see is whether or not with these acquisitions, the games are just not going to be on PlayStation. To me, that's really the only impactful thing. But then again, that's not a big deal if you're willing to get other platforms to play games. So that's neither here nor there for me, right? But Microsoft's playing the strength that they do got. They just got money. And it's not hard to see which publishers and which developers are successful. It really isn't. Even I could make that decision. I could have just easily said, yeah, buy Activision, get Call of Duty. That's not a hard thing, right? Like for me, for PlayStation, if I worked for PlayStation, they told me, hey, You got a blank check. Who you gonna get? I would tell them get Take-Two. You'll be out your mind not getting Take-Two. It's easy. You have control Grand Theft Auto, and since you're into live service games and all that stuff, now you got 2K. 2K could stay multiplayer. I mean, hell, MLB The Show's multiplayer, right? You'll make lots of money with 2K in games, right? And I think PlayStation endorses the professional, tournaments for 2K anyway, so you might as well take it, right? The next spot for me is either Square Enix or Capcom. Definitely Capcom. I mean, Sony bought Evo. Capcom makes some of the most popular fighting games. So, go after Capcom. Get Street Fighter under your belt. Sure, you could keep it multiplayer, but you own Evo, right? Bring back Marvel vs. Capcom, all that stuff. It's not hard if you got a blank check and buy publishers, right? So that's what Microsoft's doing, right? And I think some people are upset at that. I think recently, Colin Moriarty had some types of issue with that. Maybe I can find that video and see if I could play that for you, if you don't mind. I apologize because I just thought about that. So let's see if I could get that video. Oh, here we go. So let's look at what Colin Murray is, right? So let me go to this screen. We could look at it. Well, I'll put it in big just for you. Let's see what he says right here.
As I listen to the testimony and read the stories and read all the documents and the discovery, the thing that I'm brought back to, and this is just my honest take, and people can take it however they want, is that why are you so vociferously rooting for the company that's telling you they're so bad at this that they need to go buy things? Their entire course of operation throughout the entire case is how bad they are at it, that they can't do it. In fact, Phil Spencer had said about mobile gaming that they couldn't do it, quote unquote, organically, right? Like admitting it. Now that's maybe true, maybe not. But my biggest thing is not that you're rooting for an entity, right? I think about small market baseball teams. This is a weird example, and I know it's out of your wheelhouse, but in the MLB, unlike the NFL and the NHL, there is no salary cap, meaning that teams can spend whatever they want, like on players. So the Yankees often spend hundreds of millions of dollars more than other teams, while in the NFL, everyone spends the same amount of money. And so in the NFL, you have a lot of it is general management and coaching and obviously player skill and making the right choices, but it's all a level playing field. In the MLB, it's not. And the most impressive teams to baseball fans are not the big market teams that win, but the small market teams that win. There's especially Tampa Bay Devil Rays. I think they're just called the Rays now. They are a notoriously small market team that doesn't spend any money and just drafts players and wins and does really well. That's impressive. And so when I look at the situation, I'm like, why are you rooting for someone who's bad at it, an entity that's bad at it, that has had more money than anyone to make this work and can't, that has since the very beginning tried to buy its way in? Of course, we always talk about Nintendo, but so many other things, and just blatantly throwing its money around. And of course, as we see here in these quotes, which we'll use, they have every intention of trying, or at least had every intention of trying to spend whatever they could to get whatever they wanted. This to me is a weird thing to root for. I don't get that. It's like they're basically going like, we suck. We can't make it work. Look how badly we're getting our asses beat. We need much more. It's like, why would you ever want any of these entities under their control when they can't do it? That doesn't make sense to me.
All right, so let me address Colin's point, and hopefully I could provide clarity. So the problem is we are actually looking at these companies like sports teams. While I understand the analogy, and I use sports analogies as well, I've done it, but fundamentally, these are not sports teams. Right? The reason why I praise Sony for their skills and I bash Microsoft for their lack of skills is because of the end result. And I think that's what people have to remember. I think, Colin, you have to remember the end state is ultimately And give me a second so I could show this. The end state is ultimately this. Or if you have an Xbox controller. What am I playing on this? That is ultimately what you get out of this, right? The reason people are cheering for Microsoft to do this stuff is because those gamers, they're not having this controller, they have their Xbox controller. And this results in what they can play on their Xbox controller, especially if they are part of Game Pass. That's the reason why they're rooting for Microsoft. It's not really rooting for Microsoft like a sports team. See, a sports team, you gave your examples and you're impressed because really it's about the talent of those players and you're impressed on how a team can be formed together, you know, especially under certain conditions and able to accomplish something. And that's impressive, right? But that's really what we celebrate with sports teams. We celebrate their skill sets and how they're able to compete with other teams and come out victorious, right? Even if they don't win the championship, we're impressed with how far as they go. That doesn't matter in gaming. We're not impressed with, you know, if a team or a developer can make a game with a 10 million budget and it competes with Grand Theft Auto. We don't care about that. Look at Grand Theft Auto. Grand Theft Auto is possibly one of the most expensive games they ever make. We don't downplay it like, well, Grand Theft Auto is great, but they spent $750 million. So yeah, I mean, yeah, duh. Well, yeah, if every game costs $750 million, then they will all be great. Like, we don't do that. We don't care how much money was spent on the game. At the end, when we play it, that's the credit, right? So people are cheering for this, primarily the people who play on Xbox, or they play with Game Pass on PC, because if Microsoft is successful, it results using a mechanism where they only pay 10 to 15 bucks. Well, now the price is increasing as of July, whatever, but they pay a monthly fee and they have more content to play on their controller. And that's really it. The whole behind the scenes of, even though I explained that Microsoft is trash, some people really don't care that Microsoft is trash. Now, granted, some of you might be thinking, well, Porter, your first 30 minutes of this video is talking about the quality of Microsoft. I'm like, yeah. So that way people understand who to put the blame on. Don't put the blame on Sony or anybody else. People got to hold the brand responsible. Microsoft put Xbox in the position of what it is, and right now they're trying to buy their way out. And guess what? That's a strategy. They have the money, and if that's all they're only good at, if they're only good at buying stuff, then so be it. It is what it is. If I was a primary Xbox fan, and if Xbox was my primary platform, the only concern I would have is, will these purchases, Bethesda, ABK, make Xbox better? Or is there a chance that Bethesda and ABK end up being worse because of Xbox lack of leadership? And that's something I think would be a valid discussion, right? You know, a drop of crude oil ruins a batch of honey, right? But no amount of honey will fix a barrel of crude oil, right? So the question is, will Bethesda, and if Microsoft is successful in acquiring ABK, will that make the brand better? Or is there a chance that Microsoft is absorbing talent, absorbing IPs, and those publishers are in danger of going downhill due to the lack of leadership? We already see Bethesda coming out the gate piss poor with Redfall. Microsoft made no attempt to stop that. And we cannot say that Microsoft hands off. They are not hands off. We already seen from the FTC meeting, Microsoft is very hands on with all these decisions. In fact, they are so hands on, they're making decisions and doing things even when the company is not even realizing it's happening. Right? Bobby Kotick testified he had no idea that Microsoft was already making deals on Call of Duty. He didn't find out until he read it on the news. Bobby Kotick, CEO of Activision, did not realize Microsoft is promising 10-year deals to Boosteroid, to Nintendo, to all these entities until he read it. So think about it. The CEO of Activision found out about these deals when we found out. I found out what Microsoft was doing And Bobby Kotick found out what he was doing. We both the same. But he's the CEO. And he had no idea. Peter Hines, head of marketing for Bethesda. He didn't even know that Microsoft was going to treat Activision different than his own company, right? And his only concern was because he's, in charge of marketing. He didn't want Todd Howard, right, to end up being an interview. And he talks about Bethesda games. And then somebody brings up, well, Activision's games are still going to be on PlayStation. How come your games is not on PlayStation? And Todd Howard's has no idea how to answer that. Because they had no idea that was happening. In their mind, sure, Bethesda's going to be exclusive to Xbox. In their mind, ABK or any other company is going to be the same fate. Right? But when they found out ABK, the game's still going to be on PlayStation and stuff like that, they're like, wait a minute. Alright. So, we can't put our games on PlayStation, but ABK can. How do we explain that to the audience or to our Bethesda fan base? Because, believe it or not, Bethesda has a huge PlayStation fan base, right? That's the reason why before the purchase they made deals with Sony for Deathloop and Ghostwire Tokyo for time exclusives. They were willing to keep it off Xbox, right? They were cool with that. And I'm pretty sure Starfield probably would have been the same because they have a huge fan base. So now they're put in a position where, wait a minute, ABK could put their games on PlayStation, but we can't. How do we explain that on interviews? And that's all Peter Hines was concerned. This came out of FTC, right? Now, again, I'm not arguing that Microsoft made the bad decision. It's clear that you buy properties, you buy developers, you buy studios, you buy IPs. Yeah, you're gonna make them exclusive for your brand. That's really the point. I mean, that just makes sense. I mean, when Nintendo bought out Bayonetta, they didn't say, oh, well, Bayonetta 1 was on PlayStation and Xbox, so we got to keep it. No, they kept that to themselves. Just makes sense, right? But Microsoft and Xbox ineptitude, you got to ask yourself, even if you do buy all this stuff, do they know what to do with it? Or are they just going to take more studios and just head them in the wrong direction? We don't know. The best you can hope for is Microsoft figures their stuff out. But I will say this, from the PlayStation end, and what we learned is, with the emails from the PlayStation, it was revealed that Sony is not actually worried about the acquisition, right? I think one of the emails stated, if I could find it, internal conversation, they actually are not worried about it at all. They said that the PlayStation will be fine. In fact, I think there was even talk saying that they feel they'll get more out of Bungie than Microsoft will get out of ABK, which is, I think, a stretch. Let's see, Sony, blah, 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 blah. Let's see. Let's see. Here we go. Now I'm getting all these weird ads, which is annoying. I really hate these weird ads. Let me show you. So right here, Sony PlayStation CEO said that it would be more than okay if Xbox purchased ABK. Microsoft responds. Right, so this came out. Sony Interactive CEO has spoken out against Microsoft plan to buy. Sony has claimed that Microsoft cannot be trusted. But in a new email from Ryan, PlayStation wrote that it is not an exclusive play at all, and that he believes Call of Duty will continue to launch on consoles. And that's what I really would like to hear from PlayStation, right? They'll be fine. They'll be okay. I think the real question for us PlayStation fans is Sony balancing out their drive for games as a service and while maintaining the amazing single player games that put them on the map, right? I think that's really it. I'm not really worried about ABK, whatever. Okay, I'm just not. But I'll be quite frankly, I haven't been playing much ABKs. The days of Call of Duty was primarily on my PlayStation 3 days. Then the PlayStation 4, it's kind of toned down. And I don't really play the multiplayer at all. I play the single player whenever I get a copy or whatever. But for the most part, it's definitely not a day-and-day game I buy, whatever. It's just died down for me. But I'm not going to pretend that it's not one of the top games played on the platform, right? So, but for me, I'm more concerned on just the balancing act between gas games, the type of gas games, what type of projects Sony greenlights and stuff like that, right? But those are my thoughts. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you're new to the channel, stick around, hit the subscribe button, hit the like button, and then I'll see you guys Tuesday. I have a podcast, 60 frames no lag. I will see you at 8:30 p.m. Eastern time, and we'll talk about the topics. Until then, I hope you guys have a great extended weekend. Happy 4th of July to those in the United States, to everywhere else around the world. Enjoy your weekend. Enjoy your games. Love, peace, happiness. This is your only friend, YouTube Streets, Puerto77, and I'm out of here. You guys take care. Peace.